From our investigation, we feel that this individual strongly is involved in other homicides. We have taken evidence out of the building by the medical examiner to be examined.
Softly spoken, handsome, and intelligent, Jeffrey Dahmer's boy-next-door facade concealed urges that eventually shocked the world. Between 1978 and 1991, the so-called Milwaukee Cannibal murdered 17 men and boys, committed necrophilia, consumed human flesh, and utterly lost himself in what he later described as a holocaust of his own making. These atrocities are familiar to true crime buffs, but here are some facts you may not have known about one of America's most terrifying serial killers. 1. He had his own fan club at school. Jeffrey Dahmer was in many ways a withdrawn and obsessive child. One of his favorite hobbies was to dissect animals and collect their bones. However, he was also known as a class clown at school and impressed other kids with his outrageous pranks. These included pretending to have seizures and fits, which was known among his peers as doing a Dahmer. Some fellow pupils were so tickled by Jeff's antics that they dubbed themselves the Dahmer Fan Club and actively encouraged him to take it further. Years later, when Dahmer's crimes came to light, it stunned his former classmates. John Backdorf, author of the acclaimed graphic novel My Friend Dahmer, explained, "It's like getting hit with a 2x4. Suddenly, all the goofball antics and silly things we'd done became completely sinister and troubling." 2. He performed zombification experiments. The grisly nature of Dahmer's murders has become a part of American serial killer lore. Alongside the acts of necrophilia and cannibalism that made him notorious, he also performed bizarre experiments to try and subjugate his victims. One of them was Errol Lindsay, a teenager he lured into his apartment. Dahmer sedated him, drilled a hole into his skull, and poured in hydrochloric acid, thinking it would turn him into a docile zombie. Incredibly, Lindsay survived this initial ordeal and woke up complaining of a headache before Dahmer strangled him. Another subject of his ghastly experiments was teenager Konorak Synthosopophine. Like Lindsay, he survived having acid put into his skull, and even managed to leave the apartment when Dahmer had gone to buy more alcohol. 3. His first victim was a hitchhiker. Just after he graduated from high school, in June 1978, he picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, took him home to his parents' house where they drank beer and had sex. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer killed him with a blow to the head with a barbell. He dismembered the corpse of his first victim, packed the remains in plastic bags, and buried them in the woods behind the house. It would be another 9 years before he took his second victim. 4. He was caught red-handed and got away with it. Dazed and disorientated, Synthosophony was found on a street corner by 3 women. They promptly called the police, but Dahmer somehow managed to convince the officers that the boy was an adult and that they'd simply had a drunken lover's tiff. The women who'd originally found the victim were incredulous, but the police bought Dahmer's story completely. They didn't feel anything was amiss, even when they accompanied Dahmer and Synthosophon back to the killer's flat, which stank of decaying flesh due to a previous victim lying in the bedroom. Satisfied that everything was fine, the officers left. Dahmer murdered Synthosophon straight afterwards. 5. He planned to turn his victims into an altar. When Dahmer was finally apprehended, he confessed he'd been planning to create an altar in his apartment, using the remains of his victims. It was a serious project for Dahmer. He later created a detailed sketch of the imagined altar, which would have consisted of a black table adorned with skulls and flanked by whole skeletons. For Dahmer, it would have been a meditative area, where he intended to sit on a black leather chair and bask in his bloodlust. Or, as he himself described it, it would be a place where I could cleanse my thoughts and feed my obsession. He was obsessed with Star Wars and The Exorcist III. Jeffrey Dahmer's lethal urges can't easily be explained, but we do know they were there from a very young age. As a child, he had been fascinated by dead animals, and as a schoolboy, he'd fantasized about incapacitating a jogger and sexually assaulting him. He also claimed his first life just weeks after graduating high school, when he picked up and murdered a hitchhiker. That said, it's certainly true that Dahmer psyched himself up to kill by watching certain movies. He relished the wickedness of the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, even going as far as wearing yellow contact lenses to resemble the Star Wars villain. Dahmer was also fixated on The Exorcist 3, which focuses on the horrific exploits of a supernatural serial killer. One victim who managed to escape remembered seeing The Exorcist 3 playing in the background. Dahmer himself spoke of the importance of the film, saying, "I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape." Thanks for joining me on this journey into the darkest secrets of Jeffrey Dahmer's life. Share your thoughts on his case in the comments below, and let me know which other true crime stories you'd like me to cover in the future.